Hi, it's Wednesday, and that means it's time for another video edition of Widower Wednesday. I'm Abel Keogh, author of the book Dating a Widower, and today we're going to discuss something that's been on my mind for a long time. It's something that I've thought about for years and just haven't quite figured out the way to say what I want to say. But it's kind of reached a point where I've been thinking about this and it's been percolating a little bit in my brain. So, what I'd like to discuss today is about the end of grief, how grief ends and when it comes to an end. And the reason this has been on my mind a lot is that if you go to a lot of widow and widower boards or grief websites, it's not necessarily unique to widow and widower boards, but any kind of grief website or grief chat, there's kind of this overlying assumption there that grief has no end and that it's something that you have to learn to live with. That, whatever, you've lost a spouse, a child, fill in the blank, a parent. That this sadness and this grief will always be with you. And it's always bothered me because it's not true. And I'm not just speaking from my own experience here. I've talked to clients and friends who have overcome grief, and they've reached a point in their life where, where they can kind of look back on that person and memories and stuff, and they're not grieving anymore. And it bothers me that we preach out here that grief is something that you learn to live with, because it's not. Grief can come to an end, and it doesn't matter what type of grief it is, whether you're talking about the loss of a spouse, a child, a loved one. And again, it doesn't have to be necessarily related to death. We go through grief when when we go through divorce, when we lose a job, or when we go through some kind of other traumatic experience. Maybe, again, maybe we hoped for something, and whatever, maybe, I don't know, trying out for a team or wanted a promotion or something, and we just didn't get it. And we have these other kind of traumatic experience where we go through loss. And I'm not saying that all grief is the same. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that all grief can be overcome, right? That we can reach a point, no matter what we're grieving, that we can reach this point where we're happy again. And this grief isn't something that we're learning to live with or carrying around our entire lives. Now, I know some of you are watching this and thinking, well, Abel, there's a difference between losing a spouse and a divorce or a job loss. And you know what? I 100% agree. Those are different kinds of losses. But something I want you to think about is, why is it that we expect some people to get over grief and some people not to? For example, when somebody gets divorced, we generally expect them, yes, we expect some, maybe some angry words and some bitterness. And yes, you have to kind of grieve that marriage. Or maybe when you lose a job, right? There's people that that have invested a lot of their identity in their job, for example, and they can lose a job, and it's hard and it's traumatic, and they grieve the job and those lost connections, and there's stress and stuff like that. So I agree that there's different kinds of grief here, and yes, that's not the same. Losing a divorce isn't the same as losing a spouse or losing a job and things like that. But why is it that when people get divorced, or they lose a job or something like that, we kind of expect them to put their lives together, right? We kind of expect them eventually to get over the divorce, whatever that looks like, or in job loss, find a new job and things like that. But when it comes to like death, right? When it comes to like losing a spouse or a child or a parent, we kind of reach a point where we're like, you got to live with that forever. I mean, don't you see the two different messages that we're sending there, and why the difference, and this is why I guess one of the reasons it bothers me so much is that telling people that grief never ends is telling them that they have no control over their life, and that is wrong. We have more control over our lives than we think about, and you can reach a point, I promise you can reach a point, no matter what you're grieving here, where you can think about the past or the person or whatever it was, whatever it is that you're grieving, and you can not get upset and sad, and you can have a wonderful second chapter, whatever that second chapter is. You know what I mean? But really, I just want to, really, why is it that we expect some people to kind of move on and get over it, but some people we don't? I find it very destructive. I see this all the time in coaching sessions. For example, I'll talk to widowers, and they say, "Well, grief is something I have to learn how to live with," and I just kind of I sit there as I'm talking to them, and I say, "Well, why is it something we have to learn to live with? How is it, if you feel like you have to live and learn, that you have to live with this loss and grief your entire life, how does that stop you, or how does that hinder you from making new connections and having new relationships? And if you choose to go out and date again, making those kind of connections with people where you want to get married again, where you want to have this. How is it that how let's talk about how grief hinders you from moving forward and having a happy second chapter, or I'll even talk to people who are dating widowers, and what do they say? It's like, yeah, so-and-so says, this guy I'm dating, he says that he's going to grieve his entire thing. I'm like, do you really want to be with someone that's going to grieve their entire life? It's a totally destructive philosophy that's out there, and it's a false philosophy. Now, I know that it doesn't happen overnight. Some of you are thinking, well, Abel, you've overcome this, or you say you've overcome it. You have friends and stuff that overcome it. How long does it take? And I'll talk about that in a sec. But just think about it for a minute. Think about living a life and having this mindset that you can't be happy again, and I mean genuinely happy. Yes, I know people, you suffer loss and you have moments of happiness, and it's kind of this weird roller coaster that you go on. But just think about how destructive that mindset is, or how how you're limiting yourself with that mindset if you think that grief is something that you have to live with for the rest of your life. I mean, what's that stopping you from doing? I don't get it. I really don't, and I find it just holds people back. And I'm here to tell you that you don't have to be held back by grief. That you can overcome it and eventually be happy and look at all those things again and not be sad and not be angry. Now, on a time frame for this, I've seen it in clients and friends and family and things like that, and in myself. This is an average. Everybody's grief, and again, I'm talking about the loss of again, a spouse, child, parent, things like that, someone that you're close to. Now, I generally takes about 5 years is going to be my rough time frame, maybe 5 to 7 years to reach a point where one can completely put the grief behind him. And I know I'm overgeneralizing. Some people are a little faster, some people are a little slower. But the point is that you can reach a point, let's just say 5 years, where you can really be happy again and kind of move past it and do it. Where like a date comes up, like the anniversary, maybe it's the anniversary of your late spouse's, your wedding to your late spouse, or your late spouse's birthday or something like that, where you can reach a point where you can just kind of smile and say, man, those were good times, and you just move on from there. It's so wonderful, it's so liberating, and it's so freeing. And for those of you who are thinking like, well, how long has it been since I've lost my spouse, or how long has it been since my partner lost a spouse? It doesn't mean that that they can't be happy and you can't have a relationship before that moment. I'll talk about my experience about that in a minute. But the point is that it's just something you kind of chip away at little by little, and it's something you have to kind of work towards. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but I just want you to understand that you can be happy again, and you can reach this point where the grief isn't defining who you are, and you can go on and live your life. So what I want to do here is I want to tell you 2 stories about grief. One is about a friend, and I'm going to talk about two different kinds of losses here. I'm going to talk about my friend's loss and the grief that she had to go through, and then I'm going to talk about my loss and the grief that I had to go through. And I want you to note some similarities and stuff in the story, and just kind of ask yourself while you're listening to these stories, what I want you to ask yourself is why is it that we kind of expect my friend to get it together, and why and move on with her life, and we can kind of see what she went through, and why is it that put yourself, if you lost a spouse, in my shoes. Why is it that I'm supposed to be told that, well, you're going to be sad the rest of your life, that you have grief is something you learn to live with, okay? Just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as I'm telling you these 2 stories. Now, years ago, this is back when I worked in the tech industry a long time ago, I had a coworker I was good friends with. We're just going to call this coworker Joe, okay? This is coworker Joe. We worked together. He taught me a lot about marketing. And he was one of those coworkers. Sometimes you have coworkers where you just get along really good with that person. I mean, you have coworkers that hey, it's cool, we're here. But some people you get along with really good. And this was one of those coworkers that I got along with really good. We had a lot in common. We could talk about a lot of stuff, a lot of the same interests. I know we'd go on business trips together. We'd go to conferences and stuff in San Francisco, and it was always kind of fun because we'd go out and try new places to eat and go to baseball games or whatever it was going on in San Francisco, and just kind of had a blast together. Also had a lot in common. He had a wife and 5 kids. I don't know if I had 5 kids at the time. Maybe I had 3 or 4 at the time. But he had a wife and a big family. And anyway, we worked together for several years, and then he got a new job. And I was sad to see him go, but it was a good opportunity for him. He took this job, and then one day, and we kind of kept in touch. Email, text once in a while, whatever. We kind of kept in touch. And then one day he fell off the face of the earth. I tried to call him one day, wasn't getting any responses to my texts. Wasn't like I call his number, it was like a busy signal, which is all weird. And in the days of cell phones, you don't get busy signals. And I was like, man, what's going on? And emailing him, and like he wasn't returning my emails and stuff like that. And then what happened was is that I learned a few weeks later that he was arrested. and ultimately got convicted for a lot of nasty things. He had this second life, I guess, apparently that nobody knew about. But anyway, he got arrested, and was ultimately convicted. Like served 20, 30, or he's serving. He's still serving as far as I know, but he was convicted and was like serving 20 or 30 years for his crimes in a federal prison somewhere. So that's kind of the background to the story. Now, I want you to imagine being this man's spouse, Joe's spouse here. And I actually ended up connecting with her on social media, following her on Instagram and a few other places. So, but I want you to imagine being Joe's spouse, right? You wake up one day thinking you have this great marriage, you got all this stuff, and the next thing you know, the police are coming into your house, arresting your husband, and wow, and just like that, you're a single mom to 5 kids. You've got to kind of deal with this trial and learn all these horrible things he's been doing, and you're going through a divorce. You divorce him in the meantime and stuff like that. I mean, oh my gosh, your life is turned upside down. And it was interesting following her on social media. And again, she didn't chronicle this it wasn't like posts every day or anything about this, but every once in a while she would just kind of write about how she was doing or how her kids were doing. And there was days where she was just angry, at him, and understandably, there was days that she was just sad. Oh my gosh, I'm a single mom. How can I do this? Just all these emotional social media posts, and good posts, by the way. I thought she was just at least being open and honest and transparent. And I kind of followed her on this journey for several years, and ups and downs, and things like that. And I mean, I honestly can't imagine what she was going through. I think it was just horrible, just a completely horrible experience. And and I'm sitting here, I don't even know what to say to her other than, hey, me and your husband were good friends, and I'm sorry this happened to you. But anyway, it was interesting. So this went on for several years, just kind of keeping tabs on her through social media. Slowly, again, a lot of valleys at the beginning, but slowly had some peaks towards, as time went on, getting some peaks. She's putting her life together, adjusting to the new reality. And then I want to say it was about 5 years, and give or take a year here, but about 5 years after all this happened, happiness came. And she wrote this social media post about taking her kids to see their father in federal prison, which you think, like, oh my gosh, hey kids, we're going to go see dad. He's in federal prison. I just can't imagine what that would be like. Horrible experience. But happiness. So it was about 5 years after all this happened, and she's been grieving her marriage, and the loss of her husband and things like that. And about 5 years afterwards, she was just able to put everything behind her and let it go. And she wrote this wonderful social media post, and it was how she was watching her kids interact with their dad. In prison, they're in the prison meeting area or whatever it is. They're sitting there, they're interacting, they're catching up with their dad, and it had been about 5 years, and she was just able, all of a sudden, all at once, just to kind of let it go, and just all the stuff she had gone through, just was gone. All the anger and the bitterness and the sadness and all those emotions which she had gone through was just gone. And it just kind of she described it as just kind of just this burden being gone, and everything just kind of washing off of her shoulders, and she was just done. She had just kind of moved on from it. And it wasn't just something, she talks about this as something that happened, and if you had followed her social media posts, this was a journey, right? It was, oh my gosh, my husband's been arrested, and now I gotta go through a divorce, and all this stuff's coming out of trial, blah, 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 blah. And then it was finally to the point 5 years later where it just kind of washed out and went away. And anyway, just a beautiful social media post. And I actually think I commented on that, just said, this is wonderful. But she reached a point where she was, I want to say where she wasn't grieving anymore, right? She wasn't grieving or angry or anything over what had happened. She had reached the point where everything was kind of just put on, and it was in the past. And from that, the really cool thing was all this growth that happened afterwards. So again, occasionally she'd post on social media, and guess what? She found love again. I think she remarried, and this other guy is helping her raise the kids, and he has kids of his own or whatever, and have this big happy family. And her posts now, they aren't about the past anymore and all this stuff that happened. It's like, going on adventures with her husband, and her kids are growing up now. They're graduating from high school, they're going to prom and things like that, and going to college, and just all these wonderful things. And it's all focused on the future and the present, and it's so wonderful and beautiful. And she's created this wonderful new chapter 2 in life for herself, right? So it's a great story. And so think about it, though. we kind of, again, I think anybody can say, oh my gosh, that's horrible. We can try our best to empathize and have compassion with, for what she went through, even if we can't experience. But, do we really expect this, a friend of mine, would we sit there and expect her to have this event and keep her sad and miserable her entire life? I think there's obviously a time period for sadness and misery and anger, but she put her life together and got it back, and it's so wonderful. And to see her post now, they're so happy, and for years they've been happy, and it's just this most wonderful thing. And yet, when it comes to widows and widowers, we're told you can't ever have that because grief is with you forever. I want to say, is it? Is it really? I don't think it is. Let me tell you my story here. Now, some of you may be watching this for the first time, so a really quick summary of my experiences is I lost a wife and daughter within 9 days of each other, started dating months after, and maybe about 6 or 7 months after I lost a spouse, I met a wonderful woman named Julie, and fell in love with her pretty quick and instantly. And anyway, long story short, is we ended up getting married 15 months after I lost my wife. And again, happy, making progress, doing things like that. Now, I'll be completely honest and admit that was all my grieving done? Was I 100% done grieving when I met Julie? Answer is no, I wasn't. Now, I had made enough progress to where I think, we could have a normal, more or less a normal life together, and we could move forward and obviously start a family, but there were still times, even though I had forgiven Krista for taking her own life and things like that, there were still times where I got angry and sad, and I kind of kept them to myself because I didn't want it to interfere with my marriage. But I think, looking back, I can say, yeah, I still had some grieving to do. I still had some things to work through when I married Julie. Didn't stop me from marrying her. I think we both felt that I was to a point where, we could get married and move forward together. But there was some kind of work I had to do. So anyway, I married Julie, and I want to fast forward we had been married about 5 years. So this is Halloween. And this is 6 years shy of the anniversary date. It's just a few. So this is Halloween. It's about 2 weeks shy of the 6-year anniversary date of Krista's death. And I remember, it was Halloween. I was excited because I had a bunch of little kids at the time, and this was like going to be the first time I was going to take at least the oldest one trick or treating. He was old enough to go trick or treating. I was all excited for this, happy dad moment. Ooh, I get to go trick or treating with one of my kids, something I've always wanted to do. And I'm getting excited. I'm driving home from work, and about a block home from work, I stop at a stop sign, and there's parents and some early trick-or-treaters going across, and one of the trick-or-treaters is this girl, and she's probably about 6 or 7 years old, has this beautiful brown hair, dressed up as a princess, and it struck me at that moment. I just, for some reason, just seeing that girl triggered a memory of my daughter Hope, who had died 6 years earlier. And I remember sitting there thinking, just kind of looking at her, it was kind of a punch in the gut. It was like, oh my gosh, not only should I be taking my son trick-or-treating, Hope should be out there too, and she should be alive, and I should have this wonderful thing. And I remember just kind of getting really emotional about it, right? And thinking like, oh my gosh, just one of those moments that you just have sometimes. And anyway, I remember after having that moment, I pulled into the garage a minute later, had to sit there and compose myself, and I did. And anyway, ended up going inside and ended up, just trying to psych myself up again for trick-or-treating, for the first time with my oldest kid. And anyway, he was all dressed up in something, I don't know, a transformer or something. I can't remember what it was, but he's all dressed up in this costume. And, I take him trick-or-treating, and it's interesting. He really doesn't think, he was probably 3 or 4, and he doesn't think trick-or-treating's that cool. We do maybe 5 houses. And, it's kind of a letdown. I thought he'd be like running from house to house and getting candy. And he was just kind of like, this is weird. After about 5 houses, he's like, I'm ready to go home. I'm like, you ready to go home? He's like, yeah, I'm ready to go home. I'm like, oh, this wasn't how I envisioned trick-or-treating, but whatever. Okay, we can go home. And so I took him home, and he's sitting there eating the 2 pieces of candy or whatever it is that he got. And anyway, at some point, I remember the whole family was sitting there at the table at some point. I guess we were dividing up candy, and I had my 3 kids there, and Julie and me. And I just remember just looking at them and just realizing how wonderful it was to have them in my life, to have just to realize I had these blessings, and like, wow, I've had this great second opportunity. I'm married to a wonderful woman. I've got 3 kids, and we're sitting. And yes, Halloween wasn't what I thought it was going to be. Thanks for not wanting to go trick or treating, but it's just like, oh my gosh, just realizing my blessings and just how happy I was. And at that moment when I had that experience, I had the same experience that my friend had earlier, and I could feel everything I just let it go, and this wasn't something again that just happened. It's been something I've been working towards for years and years and years, and I'll get into some more details at a later time. But just having this burden, it felt like this burden was lifted off my shoulder. And the thing is I could just feel everything, all this anger and sadness and everything I had towards Krista and stuff was gone. It was gone. It was just it was crazy. And I remember I was crying, or I was tearing up, and I wasn't tearing up because I was sad. I was tearing up because I was happy. And Julie's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine. Just this is a wonderful family moment, stuff like that." And which was all true, but it was interesting. From that moment on, I was never angry at Krista again. I was never sad about Hope again. And I was able, grief came to an end at that very moment. Grief ended, and it was wonderful. It was beautiful. Grief came to an end. And that's, I guess, my own experience, my friend's experience. I look at that and I'm like, why are we telling people that grief can't come to an end? It can come to an end. It really can. And you can reach this point where, like now I can think back of Krista, and was our marriage perfect? Was she perfect? No, of course not. But I can just look back at those times as good times. I can look back at the, when she died and when she killed herself. For those who don't know, I was there. It was, you can read it in the first chapter of Room for Two, a horrible experience. But I'm not grieving anymore. I'm happy. I've built this life, and it's just wonderful now. Now I have 7 kids, and still have Julie, and we have this wonderful life together. But grief hasn't been there for a long time. I'm here to tell you that grief doesn't have to be there for you either. And so when people are out there saying that, grief is something you have to live with, it's not something you have to live with. It's something that you can overcome. Now, thanks for hanging on this long. I know a lot of you are thinking, well, how did you get there? How did your friend get there? How can I get there, right? That's what you want to know, is how can I reach the point where I can stop grieving? And there is a way that you can reach there. And I will tell you in my next Widower Wednesday video, I'm going to do a part 2 of this. Yes, I know, cliffhanger, sorry about that. But I wanted to spend the first part of this just kind of setting this up and letting you know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, that there is an end to grief, and you can reach it. And in my next video, there's 2 things that you can do, and I'm going to talk about those 2 things, that you can start your journey and reach a point at some point in the future. Again, it might be a little bit different for everybody, but I promise you can reach a point in the future where your grief can end, and it's not something that you have to live with. All right, I'm Abel Keogh, author of the book Dating a Widower. Watch for part 2 next week. Go ahead and like this video. Leave your own comments below if you have questions you want me to address in the next video as well. Happy to go ahead and address them. But promise you, the end of grief can come. Comment, like, subscribe. If you want to schedule a coaching session, there's a link down there as well if you want to discuss in a one-on-one setting how you can overcome your grief as well. I'm Abel Keogh, author of the book Dating a Widower, and I'll see you next Wednesday.